I think so. Cool. Well, good morning, everyone. For those of us who joined us earlier, you would have noticed Nick and I were sitting here a little bit awkward because we started early by accident, but thank you for your patience and for sitting with us in that time. Welcome to today's session of the I330 webinar series. So we've actually got Nick today presenting on systematic literature reviews, which is great. So if you have any questions while he's presenting, please just pop them into the chat box. I'll pop up at the end again to facilitate that Q&A, but let's just get into it and take it away, Nick.
Thank you for the introduction, Tiffany. Kia ora koutou, no mai, haere mai. Welcome, everyone. This is the latest I330 seminar. These are seminars that are run internally here at Manaaki Whenua to encourage transdisciplinary research. And today I'm going to be talking about systematic literature reviews, which I believe is a method of research, which is a fantastic opportunity for us to collaborate across different research disciplines we have here at Manaaki Whenua. So today we'll cover what systematic literature reviews are. I will describe some examples and uses of systematic literature reviews, and then I'll take you quickly through an 8-step process for completing a systematic literature review. And as Tiffany mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to add them into the chat box and I'll try to answer them towards the end. So what is a systematic literature review? It's a method that uses repeated analytical methods to collect and analyze primary research studies. As Carney and Geddes say here, systematic literature reviews are syntheses of primary research studies that use and describe specific, explicit, and therefore reproducible methodological strategies to identify, assemble, critically appraise, and synthesize all relevant studies on a specific topic. So systematic literature reviews began in healthcare research. They were developed to try and compare different medical interventions across different contexts, but they've now been adopted as a method across a wide range of different disciplines and areas of interest. So according to these authors here, Webster and Watson, a successful literature review is one that creates a firm foundation for advancing knowledge. It facilitates theory development, closes areas where a plethora of research exists, and uncovers areas where research is needed. And it's for these reasons that I think encouraging systematic literature reviews here at Manaaki Whenua could be really helpful. So I just want to take you through some examples of SLRs to illustrate to you why I think they will be of value to a wide range of different researchers here at Manaaki Whenua. So in regards to environmental SLRs, there's a journal called Environmental Evidence, which only publishes systematic literature reviews on the impacts of human activity on the environment and the effectiveness of management interventions. So here's some examples of SLRs that I found in Environmental Evidence. So there's one here on assessing community-based conservation projects, a systematic review and multi-level analysis of attitudinal, behavioural, ecological, and economic outcomes. This other one here is about small protected habitat patches within boreal production forests effective in conserving species richness, abundance, and community composition. And another one, biochar's effects on the ecosystem services provided by sandy textured and contaminated sandy soil. So you can see here there are systematic literature reviews across soil science, forest ecology, as well as conservation and conservation management. There's also a journal called Environmental Research Letters. They publish environmental SLRs, and the example of an SLR that I'm going to take you through later on, we are intending on publishing in this journal. So some examples of SLRs published in Environmental Research Letters includes Perspectives on Transformational Change and Climate Risk Management and Adaptation. Carbon intensity of corn ethanol in the United States, state of the science, meta-analyses of the relationship between companies' greenhouse gas emissions and financial performance. I'll talk a wee bit more about meta-analyses later on in the presentation. And the next one, have food supply chain policies improve forest conservation and rural livelihoods? So this gives you an idea of the broad range of different environmental topics that SLRs generally cover. And when I was doing research for this presentation, I even found examples of SLRs on SLRs. So here's a systematic literature review of different systematic literature reviews, which I thought was pretty funny. So next I'll go through the 8 steps to complete an SLR. So the first step is to develop your research question. The second step is to devise article screening criteria and a codebook. So these are the criteria for choosing and excluding different papers in the review that you found from your search. Then you develop a search chain. You select and search the databases for those papers. Then you export searches to EndNote or other similar software. Then you delete replications, search titles and abstracts for appropriate papers. Following this, you read remaining papers and delete those that are not relevant to the research question, and you complete it by filling out your systematic literature review codebook or protocol. And so the remainder of this presentation, I'll just go through these different steps individually. So the first one is to develop your research question. A research question is actually really important in an SLR. SLRs are typically designed to answer a clearly formulated question. And the typical permutation of a reviewable question is this: does intervention X on subject Y produce outcome Z? So thinking back again to sort of health research where systematic literature reviews began, maybe an example of this, a hypothetical example could be, does the shift from manual to electronic blood sugar level monitoring of diabetes patients produce better health outcomes? In the project which I'm going to be describing as our practical example of an SLR to take you through, we were looking to collect empirical examples of land use change as an adaptation response. So our research question was, are there empirical examples of agricultural land use change as an adaptation response? Now, this doesn't fit the formula exactly of the research question that SLRs typically do, but you can sort of rework it to note these different elements. So for us, the intervention is agricultural land use change. The subject is the farmers who are doing the agricultural land use change, and the outcome we're looking at is agricultural land use change as an adaptation response. And for this particular research, the goal in asking this question is to assess how interactions of values, rules, and knowledge enable or constrain adaptation options available to farmers. I won't go into this in too much detail because it's not important for the learning about the overall element of an SLR, but it's important to understand that we had an analytical approach which was beyond just simply collecting papers and seeing what was there. We wanted to collect papers on agricultural land use changes and adaptation response in order to know how these different factors of values, rules, and knowledge enable or constrain adaptation options. So the second step is to devise article screening criteria in your SLR codebook. So the first thing I'll just go through here is the article screening criteria. So you do this before you start the search. This is really important because if you don't have good screening criteria when you do your searches, you'll just find thousands upon thousands and thousands of papers, and you need to have a way of being able to filter those papers in order so that you achieve your goal. So thinking back to the research question about adaptation, empirical examples of adaptation, land use changes and adaptation response, these were the inclusion and exclusion criteria that we used. Now, because the researchers in this project are only fluent in English, we chose to only select papers that were written in English, but there could be reasons, especially if you're doing comparisons of research across many different countries, and those countries have well-established non-English scientific literature. You might want to have different inclusion and exclusion requirements there. We also chose a specific date range. I think that's fairly typical of SLRs, and that will of course be relevant depending on what question you're asking. We also chose to only include papers that were listed and indexed on ISI Web of Science. The reason why is because that database is available here at Manaaki Whenua, and I'll talk about that a wee bit more later on. We chose to only look at peer-reviewed journal papers, but there could be reasons why you might want to collect grey literature or other non-primary sources in a systematic literature review. But in this case, we were interested in peer-reviewed literature. We were also only interested in new land use changes or changes to existing land use detailed in the paper. We were also only interested in agricultural land use change, not non-agricultural land use change. We also were interested in deliberate change. So we weren't interested in non-deliberate spontaneous change that might occur. We were also, given that we were interested in analyzing it, where the values, rules, and knowledge were enabling or constraining factors, we wanted empirical examples where there were analysis of human systems. So many times there would be papers that detailed deliberate agricultural land use change as an adaptation response. However, the object of the analysis was on understanding maybe some biological changes that might have happened in the farm, for example. We also needed papers that detailed empirical case studies, and in order to be able to provide comparison across different countries, we decided to only select papers in which the case studies came from developed nations as defined by the UNFCCC Annex 1. Now, one reason for doing this, especially in regards to agriculture, is that a lot of papers on agriculture and adaptation and land use change are from developing nations, but the agricultural systems differ quite considerably from those here in New Zealand, North America, Europe, and other nations like that, where it is typically an export or for internal consumption, whereas in a lot of these developing nations, agriculture and adaptation is important in regards to subsistence. So we decided in this to only select papers from developed nations. So after you've set your article screening criteria like this, you need to develop an SLR codebook or SLR protocol. So this codebook contains a list of data that you intend to collect from each paper that passes through the screening criteria. So this typically includes like bibliographical details like the title, the author, the affiliations, but it could also include other things. So for us, when we were looking at these empirical examples of land use change, we wanted to see how if the papers cited values, rules, or knowledges that is either enabling or constraining factors on that land use change. So that was included in our SLR codebook. There are a range of different approaches to this, and I don't want to burden you with too many, but the one that is sort of the gold standard of SLRs that's used by a wide range of different journals is something called the PRISMA statement. That stands for Preferred Reporting Indicators in Systematic Literature Reviews and Meta-Analyses, I believe. So environmental research leaders who we're hoping to publish our systematic literature review to use the PRISMA statement. The other journal that I mentioned before, which was Environmental Evidence, they have their own SLR codebook, which is called the ROSES codebook. So in order to publish in that journal, you have to follow that codebook standards. And there's a whole wide range of different ones in healthcare research, like the Starlight statement here, the Moose checklist, the Strobe statement. So they all have these fancy acronym sort of titles. But like I say, I would suggest focusing on PRISMA, and the process that I'm taking you through at the moment and the illustration I'll show you at the end is following in the PRISMA guidelines. And there's this one as well, the consort statement. So the next step you have to do is to develop a search chain. Now, some of you might be a lot better versed than me at how to do this, but what you want to do is to try and test these and develop them before your final search is complete. So often you'll go through many different iterations of a search chain or multiple search chains before you end up finding the one that works best for you. I suggest using wildcard and truncation symbols when possible. Here's a few. There are sometimes the search engines that you're using will not allow you to use these symbols, but if they do, they can be really helpful in order to get, allow you to collect more papers than you otherwise would. So for example, a question mark is useful for retrieving alternate spelling in simple plural. So this one here, woman with a question mark here, we'll find woman and women. This symbol here is very useful for finding different word endings based on the root of a word, and I use this frequently when I'm making search chains, and I'll show this later on when I show you our actual search chains. And using speech marks is also good for finding exact phrases rather than fragments of the phrases. So if you search for electronic cigarettes with speech marks, it will find examples of where that phrase electronic cigarettes has been used, rather than examples of where electronic has been used and cigarettes has been used, as well as electronic cigarettes. Exact phrases can also be linked with and or not. So I'll show you the two chains that we used in order to find examples of empirical land use change as an adaptation response with these two chains here. Now, initially I had like maybe 5, 6, 7 chains, but I recognized when deploying the searches that they weren't actually yielding that many extra results. So we were happy to settle on these 2 chains here. As you can see, I used that symbol there in order to try and attach different word endings. So we have land use, changes, adaptation, and agriculture. As well, we also did this modified search in which the words were linked, but we were looking for the exact examples of these different words in full. So those were the search chains that we deployed to ISI Web of Science. Now, it is best practice to search multiple databases. Some of those are listed up there. Web of Science like we have, Scopus, Google Scholar, JSTOR, ResearchGate, for example, and there might be ones that are more relevant given your research discipline and the topic. However, some recently published systematic literature reviews have justified the use of Web of Science as the sole database, which is actually really great for us because we have access to this database. So we're able to do robust searches which are justifiable on the basis that they haven't gone through multiple databases. Of course, if you do have access, maybe through some research colleagues at universities or other institutes to do the same searches in other databases, I would recommend that you're able to do that. In our practical example, like I say, we used ISI Web of Science, and you can find this through the Manaaki Whenua Library and Information Services. We used those 2 search chains, we deployed them, and this came back with 3,898 citations. So what we need to do next is to export those citations to EndNote or another citation or abstract library. That just happens to be the one I use. So why should you do this? The first is ease of access and control. If you've got nearly 4,000 citations, it's going to be really burdensome to have those listed on a Word document or even on an Excel spreadsheet. This also allows you to store them offline. It also allows you to quickly delete any replicable or repeated, it should say, citations or duplicate citations. It also allows you to select and delete publication types. So when you extract the information from the search engine, it'll have, whether it comes from a book, whether it comes from a journal article. If you can remember the inclusion and exclusion criteria I listed, we were looking specifically only for journal papers. So I could go through on EndNote for those 4,000 citations and delete everything that said it was a conference proceeding, a book section, or a book, because that was excluded from our search. And this is an example of what it looks like in EndNote once the final search is complete. Now, it's probably way too small for you to be able to read on your screen, but up here you can see in the trash there's 3,860 citations. This is another benefit of doing systematic literature reviews as an EndNote, is that maybe by accident you could have deleted a citation where you thought it should be excluded, but then you revise and you think, oh no, maybe they actually should be included. Well, as long as you can remember some details about it, which can be a challenge sometimes, you can go back to the trash and then you can send it back into the main file and begin looking at it again. We specifically also collected information so that the abstract of everything was there, which meant that we were able to easily read through the abstracts through EndNote and didn't have to do anything else in regards to exporting that material. So the next step is to delete duplicate citations and then search the titles and abstracts for appropriate papers. So easily through EndNote, we were able to find 1,610 duplicate citations. Given the similarities between our search chains, that's probably a pretty good reason as to why there were so many duplicates in this case. If you get it, I remember doing once in this search, 2 search chains that were so similar to each other that when you did the duplicate deletion, it was clear that there had only been 2 extra added articles from the second search. So that showed me that there was probably a need to develop a different search chain in order to try and get more than 2 different citations. So after the duplicate deletion, what we would do is get the researchers who are undertaking the review to scan the titles and abstracts of the remaining citations using the screening criteria that we established in step 2 about what should be included and what should be excluded. And in our practical example, we decided to exclude a further 2,262 beyond the duplicates. leaving 62 potentially relevant studies. What we did at that stage was to read the remaining papers and delete those that were not relevant to the research question. So we read the title, we did the abstract scan, and then we closely reviewed the paper to see if they meet the inclusion criteria. After this process, myself and the research colleague that was working on with this, we split the 62 in half so that we were each having a look over them and deciding which ones needed to be included, excluded, or perhaps options where we're not 100% sure if this deserves to be in or not. So what happened from this was that both of us agreed to include 33. We both agreed to exclude 15, but we were unable to agree on a final 14 citations as to whether they should be included or excluded. We then once again went through those final 14 citations. I believe we swapped them around, so we weren't reading the same ones again, but we were looking at ones where the other person were on the fence about it. And once this was done, we agreed to add a final 5 to the systematic review, which means that out of the 3,898 citations we had at the beginning, we had 38 left for the final review. So this visualization here is called a Prisma flowchart. So these kind of visualizations show you the entire process of a systematic literature review using the Prisma method. So as you can see here, the input were these 2 search chains that were done through Web of Science. We deleted the duplicates. We went through the abstracts and title and excluded these amount of studies. We found 62 that might be added. We went through a full text screening of those. We provide reasons for excluding the ones that we excluded. We had a peer review where the 2 researchers were looking over both papers and reviewing which ones should be included or excluded. And at the end, we had 38 papers which we could code and analyze for the final study. And so that's the last step, is once you've got those 38 papers, then it's the fun work of doing and filling in the SLR codebook. So the data that will be collected depends on the reporting guidelines you've chosen, as well as the analytical approach that you're taking. To publish SLRs, devising a codebook and following the reporting guidelines closely is very important. But if the goal of doing a systematic literature review is just to scope literature for a large project, or maybe for a commercial client that isn't too concerned about meeting those same rigorous standards that would be required by the journal, this kind of attention to detail might not be so necessary. But once this is complete, contemplate your analysis strategy if you haven't already thought about that. So where I come back to meta-analyses. Meta-analyses is a statistical method that's often used in systematic literature reviews to compare different management interventions across different contexts. I'm really interested in learning more about meta-analyses, so if there's anyone who's out there that listens to this that knows about it or is able to help teach me or is interested in collaborating on a systematic literature review which contains a meta-analysis, please reach out to me. Also, we could use qualitative techniques like thematic analysis, which I presented in another I330 seminar, to analyze the data that's collected. So just to summarize, systematic literature reviews are published on a wide range of topics relevant to our researchers, such as climate change, adaptation and mitigation, conservation, soil science, biodiversity and biosecurity, economics and land management. Choose a particular codebook strategy to align with journal requirements if that is in fact your goal of conducting a systematic literature review. Spend time developing the best search chain and if possible search multiple databases. But as I noted, you are able to justify an SLR of publishable quality through simply accessing the database that we have access to here at Manaaki Whenua. It's best practice as well to get multiple researchers to screen collected papers to reduce the chance of bias in paper selection. And as I said, the analytic methods can be selected once the search method is complete, but I think it's worth considering how you plan to analyze the data before beginning the search. So thank you all for listening today. Myself and Melissa Robson-Williams, who's running the project, would appreciate any feedback. And I look forward to answering some of your questions you have about systematic literature reviews now.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, we've got a few questions already, and so if you have any, please do put them into the chat. And we've only got about 5 minutes for this, so if any more do pop up we don't have time for, Nick will take those offline and get back to you personally. So the first question we've had is, would there be such a thing as an unsystematic literature review? What's special about this approach? Is it the same as a meta review?
So I can't answer the very last part because I don't know about meta reviews, but I should have a look at that up. So the thing that makes a systematic literature review different from a literature review is the rigor of the methods that you use and the fact that it's reproducible. So as I've said in the presentation, there are specific different methods that are applied to different systematic reviews like Prisma or Roses or the other ones in healthcare that I use. So that's different from just doing a literature review, but perhaps say for a journal paper as a section in a journal paper where you simply go out and scan the literature that's relevant to your research question. So it is just that there's a systematic process that one must follow, and that when publishing, you must illustrate to the journal that you've followed in order to be able to complete it. So, so yeah, that's sort of the difference between a systematic review and just a regular literature review.
Cool. The next question is systematic literature review a product that we should offer specifically? What is the value of it standalone, or is it only really useful as part of a wider research program?
I think we can offer it to certain clients, especially when there's big gaps in knowledge. Myself and my colleague, Nick Craddock-Henry, who might be on the line, we do a lot of these together, and we've done quite a few systematic literature reviews for councils and for central government agencies that want to effectively understand what the scope of research is on a certain topic. As well, systematic reviews can often be really well cited when they're good reviews that are on a topic that are of interest to a wide range of different researchers. So I do think it's quite an impactful method, and that's sort of one reason why I want to promote it, is because yeah, it's something which can allow us to both have research impact with our commercial partners, but also research excellence when we're able to publish these into international journals. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, speaking of Nick, he did actually leave a comment, I think, in response to one of the questions, saying there are a range of reviews, including thematic reviews, systematic reviews, and systematic mapping. So it all depends on what your objectives are.
Yes, and I must admit, I've heard of like systematic mapping and those other methods that Nick mentioned, but I've only ever used systematic literature reviews. So I'd be interested to learn more about those, but I cannot offer any advice on when you would choose different options over others.
Cool. So that's all we've had so far.
Okay. We've got a couple of minutes.
Is, we might just wrap up, everyone.
Okay.
If you do have any further questions, please do reach out to Nick and or Master. But we will end it for today. So thank you for joining us. And Nick, do you want to give a quick update on the webpage? Because I know a lot of people ask, how do I access the recording?
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a good idea. So the recordings of all the i330 seminars I have on my computer, and it's my job over the next couple of weeks to try and update our internal website. And what I might do is either in whakamarama or maybe do a sneaky all company email. I'll send a notice to people so that they know that there is access to this. And I've also discussed with Tiffany that we might send in particular this seminar, a recording of it to the people who registered, because we know that in June it's quite busy, and that some people who were interested in attending and listening to this were not able to do so. So yeah, that's a sort of a quick update on this project and how you'll hopefully very soon be able to access everything through the internal website.
Cool, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you later. Mā te wā.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.